Hello, good afternoon. First off, sorry, I'm coming over from a sore throat, so I've got a cough drop in, so if it sounds a little off, I'm trying not to cough into the microphone. As stated, my name is Brian Higgins. A little bit about myself. I've been in the IT industry for over 20 years. I used to own a WISP, 4-Point Networks. Many of you here may know me from back when I had the WISP. I've been in the IT consulting side of space as well. I used to own the hosting news and several other web properties for the web hosting industry. I've done consulting nationally and internationally with a group called Third Tier. And I also own another consulting firm called Sound Technology Services out of Connecticut. I've been working with MikroTik products for about 13 or so years. That is actually my actual certificate from 2005 when I took my original training class, and some of the people in this room were even in that class with me. There's one of them right there, Corey. I have done a fair amount of tower climbing. I am, or at least was, Comtrain certified. I don't know if that expires. But we tried to make sure that this never happened. It didn't. So then in 2008 and 2009, I sold my company's the 4-Point Networks. You might recognize the logo. That's my icon on the forums. I'm not too active anymore, but I used to post a lot all the time. So there's still hundreds and hundreds of posts out there with my name on it. So after a little bit about my background, who I am, the actual presentation today is called Building an ISP in 5 minutes, and all the months it took to do it. What is Additum? I'm going to keep it short because I want to talk more about the process than the business and the product itself. But to go over in brief detail, Additum is a multi-tenant internet access management platform that's designed to be fully automated and allow turnkey solutions. Essentially, it's an ISP in a box. And I'm trying not to read too much off these slides. In general, or in summary, 5 minutes out of the box, throw an IP address on it, everything's done through the web portal, and you never have to touch any of the MikroTik command line, Winbox, the webfig, really anything. It's completely automated. All deployment models, everything is completely scripted, and automation is done throughout. And it's fully centrally web managed as well. Quick little diagram of what the system looks like. You're going to have our building ISP management portal out in the cloud. You're going to have a fiber circuit coming into the property. You're going to have a core router at the edge of the building and the tenant network. All of the tenants in the building have a router of some sort. Some of them are going to bring their own device. Some of them are going to use our zero-touch routers. Our zero-touch routers are HAP lights and other similar devices. We are, I don't know if I'm going to use the correct terminology here, so don't yell at me, MikroTik guys. We're an OEM registered partner, or whatever they call it, with MikroTik. And so we have some firmware access, or not really firmware, but some back-end access into loading configs and other stuff into the platform that they've granted us. And we use that to push default config scripts and other files onto the router that go above and beyond what can normally be done. And one of the things we do with that is our zero-touch routers. Our zero-touch routers come out of the box pre-configured for self-configuration, meaning when you power them on, they're going to go out to our web service and download the configuration for the account that they're plugged in for. And if there's no account set up for them, they're just going to wait. And they're going to keep retrying until you assign that router to a customer. And as soon as it's been assigned to a customer, within 30 seconds, that router is programmed and running. And then emails the tenant in the building their Wi-Fi information, all their login information to get online, and confirmation that their service is in fact done. Some of the main features of the product, again, centrally managed, web-based, no command line, no Winbox, no scripting, no router engineering, It's designed that your techs, your field techs, your help desk guys can do all the work on it. You can even have the property managers, property owners that are doing all the add, change, deletes on tenants. So a tenant moves in, you just let the property manager set up the account. You don't even have to get involved. They can do it all themselves. Turn off accounts, someone's not paying their bill, a couple clicks, they're shut off. A couple more clicks when they pay their bill, they come running with that check, they're back on. IP space allocation and provisioning. We track all the public IPs in the building, and assigning an IP is very simple. It's a drop down. You pick one of the IPs from the list, the tenant gets it. Here's some quick view of what the portal looks like. Some of these shots are a little old, but how does this laser pointer work? There we go. So we've got a single pane of glass for this building. You can see there's 3 tenants online right now, and there's 2 tenants that are offline. You can see the IP address that they've got assigned, what bandwidth plan's assigned, how much throughput the entire site's using. We go into one of the tenant accounts, you can see all the email history, notifications and past emails that have been sent to the tenant. When service is turned on, turned off, if they're shut off for non-payment, IP address changes, all that stuff. Every email that's ever been sent to the tenant, there's a history of it right there, including read status, if the email bounced, et cetera. Some of the reporting in the system, we've got site usage reports, so you can see how much traffic is being used by each tenant across the property. So if you've got a couple tenants that are hogging all the bandwidth at your building, you got a gigabit pipe, and everyone's complaining that they're only seeing 20 meg of bandwidth at any given time. Well, you can go and look and see that Johnny in unit 302 has downloaded 10 terabytes of data this month. And then on the individual account status, you can see bandwidth history over time, 30 days, 60 days, 128 days, 120 days, et cetera. So, enough about the actual product itself. Let's talk about a little bit how we got here. So step 1 is obviously going to pick up after we did a lot of planning, a lot of thought, a lot of engineering as to how we were going to do this. But for starters, the first thing we had to overcome, or I had to overcome, my programming background in developing the system is in object-oriented languages, .NET specifically. When I went to grab the code for the API that's published, it didn't work. There's a bug in this code. And I've highlighted the 3 lines that the bug is in yellow over here. Is anybody good with the API to know what's wrong with those 3 lines of code? By the way, this is still live on the wiki right now. Give a hint. It's right there. Can I zoom in? Sorry. So whoever wrote the API was a C# coder and then converted it to another language. Because the caret symbol in C# stands for XOR operator. In VB, XOR is written as XOR. The caret is actually an exponent. So every time this code executed and it tried to process the data coming back from the router, it was actually exponentially multiplying that code until you had a buffer overrun. And so any large data returns, any big lists of data, script files, anything that's coming back, your API would buffer overrun every time. That was a little difficult to troubleshoot because every time you Google the caret operator, all the returns come back talking about XOR, indicating that it is in fact the right code. It's not until you actually get into the MSDN articles that describe the language and operators specifically that you realize that the summaries on Google are wrong. So once we had the API fixed, then I had to learn the rest of the API, figure out how to start passing commands through the API, and how to use the API for full automation. Some of the challenges with that, the API is multi-part. Sometimes the data comes back and you have to use the first response to then send another data command back. So there were some interesting challenges in actually figuring out how everything works, because sometimes you're sending a command that's going to say where username is this, and other times where you have to send the command as list ID 2. So your first command is to generate a list of all the users, and then you find the list ID, and then you send your second command back to the API for which list number. So there's a lot of challenges that you have to overcome with that. Once we had the initial product up and running, and we had full automation on the deployment, and we were able to validate the IP address, validate the hardware was in fact up and running and configured, then we had to start developing stock configurations so we could ship equipment in. Because we're trying to sell the solution as a turnkey product. Not really so much to you guys here in the audience. You guys know how to configure a router. Most of our customers are IT consultants and IT managers who work in small businesses and offices. They are property management companies that go in and do these building management systems, and they're not network engineers. They don't know how to configure a router. So we can't tell them, here, load this RSC file on the router and expect them to actually get it done. So we had to come up with stock configs that we could ship a router in anywhere in the world. And they pull this router out, follow a very simple process that can be done on 1 or 2 pages of picturized instructions, and be able to then remotely program and provision that hardware from anywhere in the world. Once we had that achieved, then we had to come up with an ordering and billing, except we realized that redundancy and hosting was more important, because up until that point, we'd been hosting everything on our own servers and our own cloud. And we realized that there needed to be a greater level of redundancy built into the system before we could start offering this nationally and throughout the whole North American continent, to be honest. So we moved everything from our own cloud into Microsoft Azure and set up everything as distributed SQL servers, geo-replication. We've got sites running coast to coast, multiple nodes for everything, so that if any part of the country goes down, it doesn't affect the users elsewhere. And then someone reset their router. We had a core router that was in a building, and someone thought there was a problem with it. And thinking like a small IT person, they took the pen, pushed the reset button, and reset the router as if it was a Linksys. Early on, we didn't have a way of shipping default configs outside of when we shipped the hardware. We couldn't update that. And that was one of our first units shipped. So it factory reset the unit back to basically MikroTik factory settings. And we had to go in and remotely, like a screen share on their machine, and reprogram that router from stock. Well, that prompted some work with MikroTik directly. And MikroTik then gave us a way to field deploy, field upgrade the machines, the CCRs in the field, with new default configs. So we go in, and every time we issue an update to the router, we push a new default config down to that system so that it's always using the latest configuration profiles. Fully updatable field configs. That led us to update management. Once you have updates you need to ship to a router, well, how do you actually ship updates? We can't expect end users who are essentially managing these systems to go in and validate updates from MikroTik for the core OS, and we can't expect them to install them. So we had to develop a complete update logic where we're testing the machines for updates. We're determining what firmware files they need to have and what ones they shouldn't. We approve them, and then we push them down, which led to another challenge, because for many releases, the fetch tool in MikroTik was broken on large files over SSL. And of course, we're trying to do everything over SSL for security reasons, and it would fail. About 80% of the way through a download, the fetch tool would fail on 80% of downloads. So we had to then build a logic in there where we're actually testing and checking that fetch tool's output to make sure that it's downloading all the bytes of the update, because an update would start and it would finish, but it would only be 2/3 downloaded, and then we'd reboot the router and it wouldn't install and we'd be really confused. So there was another layer of logic and testing to make sure that those updates actually push out. And with those updates, this is one of the little joys of MikroTik and dealing with some of the quirks. When they rename things. So as you guys remember, it was around 6.37, I believe. All of a sudden, the wireless package became wireless FP and wireless CM2, and all that renaming. Well, all of our system configs all had originally wireless named in the package names on the enabling and disabling of the packages, which crashed every one of the updates as soon as that came out. So then we had to figure out how to do error correction in the scripts. I know Dennis earlier said he doesn't like scripting. We love MikroTik scripting. We do lots and lots of scripting out of necessity. But sometimes you have to build in your error handling and error correction so that you can work around the limitations of MikroTik to create that reliable enterprise type product. So if any of you that do scripting, this is the syntax right here. Do this. If it fails on error, then do this. MikroTik does not have a way of silently erroring out and passing on to the next line of code. It will just simply stop the script and halt all execution. So pretty much everything you do in a script that has the ability to error out for any reason, you need to wrap in a do command. So once we had all of that working, then we had to really put in a new ordering and billing system, which meant automated credit card processing, automatic order provisioning, inventory tracking, credit card refund systems, invoicing, tracking numbers, for shipping, purchase order number tracking, all of that stuff we had to build into the system so that our customers could pay us and we could collect payments on time. The first few months, or actually almost the first year we were doing this, every month I was going in and manually generating credit card invoices that were getting emailed out. We didn't have that many invoices going out, so it wasn't terribly time consuming. It was half a day. And after many months of development and the whole order processing, tracking, credit card system, now credit cards run automatically at 7:30 in the morning, first of the month, and I get an email summary with everything. It's wonderful. And then we started getting some customer feedback as we got bigger deployments out there. And customers started saying that the CPE side of it, the tenant deployment, the actual end user install, was the biggest hassle and the biggest hurdle. So if you're going to go into a building and set up 500 tenants in a day, that's 500 CPE installs. That's a lot of work for your techs to do. So then they asked us, how can you automate that? Well, that's where our zero-touch routers come in. We came up with this zero-touch system, and it's, as I mentioned before, it's these HAP lights, the HAP AC lights, and the HAP ACs. We've got all these config scripts. From the moment the device powers on, it starts looking back to our web service for the configuration for that account. And it downloads that config as soon as it's powered on. So our partners now go and take these routers. They'll go into a building with a case of routers. They've never opened the case. They're straight from us shipped. They just grab them, read the serial number off, put the serial number into the portal, and that router sets itself up when the tenant plugs it in. They don't even do it themselves. They let the property manager do it a lot of times. And it really simplifies their life, and it takes what used to be multi-hour processes down to 30 seconds to a minute. It's just a matter of grabbing that serial number. Excuse me. Other things that we do with those zero-touch routers, we capture the SSID. In fact, we allow the partners to set a template SSID for those routers, so when the tenant plugs that router in, they're going to get a unique SSID to that piece of hardware, but it's going to have the partner's, the reseller's name or the building name as the first part of that SSID. So it's going to say building 123 dash some random, pseudo-random number that represents that piece of hardware. And then every time that router gets reset, if they push the reset button on there, do a factory reset, a new WPA key gets generated. So if one tenant moves out, you take that router, you reset it, quick firmware reset on the button. Next time it boots up, it reprovisions for the next tenant that's moved in with a new WPA key. So you can reuse that hardware and know that the next guy who comes in doesn't know the password, even though he knows the SSID, because that was the router he had when he lived there. It's a new password every time. And that password and WPA key also are being, and the SSID, I'm sorry, are all being reported back up to our web portal. So if the tenant does log in to the router with the information that gets emailed to them, and they change that SSID, they change the WPA key, and they call you up 6 months later and say, I forgot my password. You can very easily go through the portal, see that password, see their SSID, or maybe they just call up and say, I'm having trouble getting online. And you say, what wireless network are you connected to? They read off the network, and you can tell whether that's actually the right network or not, because you know their network, you know their password, and you can positively tell them exactly what to do to get online. And lastly, all of that was scripting. Lots and lots and lots of scripting. So we have scripts that run thousands of lines long that generate all of this, and they're constantly being updated by our portal and pushed down to the routers to manage all of this. So it's a very involved two-way process. So our web service and the scripts on the routers are passing data back and forth. When you power that router on, sometimes there's 15 different data exchanges between the zero-touch router and the web service before that tenant actually gets online. And that all happens in about 30 seconds. And that's the last piece of it. The zero-touch routers, there was a new challenge. On the core routers, we have the API to control and manage those. And we can go in, log into that core router, and we can access that router and that device and push updates, pull data. We can't do that with the zero-touch routers because the zero-touch routers may not even have a public IP address. So all of that had to be scripted without the use of the API. So that's 100% web service driven update and control system for those devices, which meant, back to 9, lots of scripting. So in a nutshell, that's what we had to go through to create a fully automated deployment process for buildings using MikroTik. Tried not to get overly technical. I'm sorry if I did because it's right after lunch. But are there any questions? Anyone curious about anything?
So you automatically provision the devices that are put into a multi-tenant environment. How do you handle the wireless channels that you're assigning to those different devices in each of the apartments? Because if you're assigning the same channel to each one, you're creating a Wi-Fi nightmare for...
So if not everyone could hear that, the question was how do we handle the wireless device management, or wireless channel management for the devices? So at this moment, the devices are set to auto-assign their channels when they boot up. So that's one of the features the MikroTik rolled out several years ago was auto channel selection. So we're utilizing that right now. However, we have an update coming out that's going to actually do central Wi-Fi control system for the whole building. So we're going to have all those zero-touch routers in each apartment, assuming they're not using their own Cisco or Juniper or whatever in their space. That zero-touch router is going to have the tenant's private SSID. And then there's going to be a shared overlay network, a static SSID for the whole building as well. And that SSID control will, when that rolls out, will actually be based on Capspan for its channel management.
Okay.
More questions?
Language is it in MikroTik, and how best to learn that?
So the question was what type of scripting is MikroTik, what language is it? And it's MikroTik scripting language. It's a proprietary language to MikroTik. It's not based directly on anything. However, the syntax for readability is actually very similar to CSS. So if you have a code reader or something like that, and you tell it to format your code for CSS, it's going to do the highlighting and the brackets and a lot of that, your string variables. It's going to color code them correctly in the CSS format. It's not CSS, not by a long shot, but it will at least color code it pretty close to accurate if you use that for readability. As far as how to get into it, find some code examples, go on the wiki, and start doing small scripts. And just know that the number one thing you're going to run into is syntax errors that are not, the script just doesn't run, it doesn't start. So it's not like it'll run a certain length and then fail at that syntax error. For the most part, it's not even going to start the script. And for the other errors where it will fail partially through your scripting, what I found the best tool for that is to do a lot of debug logging. So add a lot of log error, log warning messages in your script as you're going. So every few steps, just a line item number or something like that, so that you can see in the log just how far it got before it failed. Whether you passed the wrong variable or the wrong interface name or something like that. Anyone else? What are we doing on time? I think that's almost perfect.
No more questions? Okay, thank you, Brian.